Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Wednesday, December 9th, 2020. And our top stories today: the Department of Education extends the moratorium on federal student loan payments, and baby boomer student debt surges. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Betsy Mayat. She is the president and founder of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors. Betsy, great to see you. Welcome back to the program this morning.
Hi, good morning.
So let's jump in. Last Friday, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos announced that there was going to be an extension to the moratorium on payments. This impacts over 42 million Americans. I want to get your reaction and just kind of remind people what the rules are here.
My reaction was, oh, thank goodness. So what we were looking, the way it's stood before 5:30 on Friday night is that the waivers on payments were due to expire December 31st. And it was looking really uncertain whether Congress was going to do an extension. Though there was a lot of chatter that it was expected that if Congress didn't do anything, that Biden would via executive order after the inauguration. So what we were looking at there was the potential for borrowers, as you said, over 40 million of them, going into repayment for 3 weeks and then not being in repayment anymore. And it would have just been really confusing for consumers and harmful for that reason and just really chaotic. So it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have people pay and then if, after inauguration day, if it's extended again, to have people not pay, it just creates a mess. It can create a mess with amortization schedules. It would just really mess things up, to put it in a layperson's term. Now, Betsy, what are you hearing in terms of going beyond January? Let's play this out. I know that the Congress now, I've heard that the Congress meeting about a potential stimulus, that CARES Act included these provisions. Would you expect that a stimulus potentially, if it is passed before January, that it might extend this out even further?
I do. What we're seeing, the bipartisan, it was like a $908 billion bipartisan, like the mini stimulus bill that's been floating around for the past couple of weeks. There is a line item in there for student loans. It's a line item with a dollar amount attached to it. So we don't know what the actual language, I haven't been able to get any intel what the actual language says, but we do anticipate that it's at least a small extension. So my gut tells me that bill probably extends it to March, maybe as far as June. I definitely don't think it extends to September. I would almost bet money on that. It doesn't extend to September. So we have that. I think, that could pass. I think if Congress doesn't do anything and it ends up being Biden that does it via executive order, I anticipate he'll probably extend it till around June.
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom line is that job growth, we had anemic job growth on Friday. I think 110,000 jobs, according to ADP, were created during the month. But we've had some, look, it's not a growing economy in the sense that people are getting back to work. And we have a vaccine, but so all these things potentially delay job growth, which means wage growth, people getting wages in which to pay these student loans, Betsy. So I guess my question is, in a very long-winded way, is, what about forgiveness here? What about student loan forgiveness? Does that have any traction come after January 20th at all?
So listen, there's sort of 2 levels or even 3 levels of conversation around student loan forgiveness. One is the legal aspect. Does Biden have the ability under executive order to do it? I don't even think he thinks that he does. He made some comments about student loan forgiveness last week, and what he said is we should have student loan forgiveness and Congress needs to get moving on that. Now, if he thought if he had executive order powers to do that, I don't think he would have pinged Congress to start working on that. The second level so that means that he would need the Congress to move forward with any type of broad student loan forgiveness. And, even if the Democrats win both of those outstanding Georgia seats, their majority in the Senate is very, very small. And with the broad economic crisis that this pandemic has brought us, I just don't see Congress approving broad student loan forgiveness when it may not provide the boost to the economy that some people think that it might. I think if we're going to get broad student loan forgiveness, my prediction is it won't be till maybe 2 years from now, depending on what happens with the midterm elections. If the Democrats end up with perhaps a stronger majority, and hopefully the COVID dust will have settled, the economy will have recovered a little bit, and I think it would take Congress focusing on a broader piece of higher ed legislation for forgiveness to happen. Because here's the bottom line. Student loans are not the problem. Student loans are the symptom. And I don't think there's anybody that disagrees that you forgive student loan debt, whether you're forgiving 10 grand or 50 grand or all of it. That doesn't mean anything if the loan debt's just going to start accruing again tomorrow.
Yeah.
So broad student loan forgiveness needs to be attached to policy that also addresses the cost of higher education so the student debt doesn't just reaccrue later on.
Yeah.
And that was my long-winded answer to your long-winded question.
It's okay. It's okay. I'd rather hear a long-winded answer from the guest than a long-winded question from the host. But let me ask you, just about a minute left. You bring up the topic of, college education being expensive, and in some cases it is. We've seen more and more people maybe go the 2-year route first, and then once they kind of figure out what they want and where they go, possibly go to a 4-year. Thoughts about maybe college tuition, reform and kind of cutting back those costs? Do you see any of that happening in the near future?
I do think that it's going to be a big conversation, at least under the Biden administration, and just moving forward in general. The strategy you mentioned, going to a 2-year college first, super smart. Never mind the fact, not only does that reduce overall costs, but 70% of students change their majors anyway. So
That's true.
Going to the cheaper college initially is a super smart idea. We saw during the election cycle that the cost of education was a big topic of conversation. So I do think that we'll see more experiments into free college, not meaning all college free for everybody, but these 2-year and community colleges, at least letting people be able to do that without loan debt.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to see. I know you've got the pulse on what's happening, well, at least better than I do. You have the pulse on what's going on. Let's hope that we get that stimulus bill and we can extend that reprieve and moratorium for a period of time. Betsy, I want to go to a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about student loan debt for baby boomers. Oh, you're going to want to hear this and a lot more. So stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate copays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month. Look, with the uncertainty of the virus and vaccines, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Here's the bottom line. Call to get significant benefits at no additional cost and see if your zip code has coverage with the Give Back benefit. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-924-3920. That's 1-800-924-3920.
Welcome back. We're talking to Betsy Mayotte of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors. Betsy, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's go to a very, very important topic. I think a recent report by Fidelity notes that baby boomers actually have student loan debt. And this really took me by surprise because, look, I think people want to learn and grow and evolve, but I didn't realize the extent by which boomers were actually going back to school and accruing debt. What can you tell us here, Betsy?
Jeffrey, I am so glad that you're talking about this particular subject because this is older borrowers have been a pet policy issue of mine for a very long time. And I think it's something we need to educate the public and policymakers about. When people think student loan debt, they think it's a young person's issue. The fact of the matter is half of all student loan borrowers are over the age of 30, a quarter are over the age of 45, and as you pointed out, the fastest growing population of those with consumers with student debt are the over 65s. I talk to borrowers like that all the time. Now, they fall into sort of two categories. They're the borrowers that took out Parent Plus loans or have co-signed on private loans on behalf of their children going to school. And then there's the ones that have their own student loan debt. Maybe they've taken a long time to repay it. A more likely scenario I'm seeing today is a lot of people in their 40s or even 50s went back to school during the 2008 recession. So they just took their loan out fairly recently. And, the tools that are available to them are the same tools that are available to all other student loan borrowers, but they might not be as helpful. Telling someone they can extend their loan debt to 25 years isn't as helpful to a 68-year-old as it might be to a 22-year-old. So we definitely need to address and look for tools that might be more helpful to the older borrower population.
Well, I think you can, we certainly applaud people for wanting to evolve and go back to school. I think that's great. And people presumably will have longer careers because of that, and they will extend their time beyond age 65. But Betsy, what about, you mentioned 25 years, 25 years plus 65, that's 90, right? What happens, for example, if you have student loan debt and you pass away for some reason? Does that get passed along to your heirs? Does that get brought into some of the estate distribution and taxing discussions? I think a lot of people need to think about what accruing this debt means. It doesn't just go away if you are deceased.
Well, it can. If you have federal student loans, they're completely discharged, tax-free, if the borrower should become deceased or becomes totally and permanently disabled. Private loans, on the other hand, whether they're the cosigner or the primary borrower, the policy on that is dependent on the lender. Sometimes that can be charged to the estate. You can't legally change the legality of a debt from one consumer to another, but it can definitely be charged to the estate.
Now, Betsy, is the same rule of thumb that we were talking about in the first segment, thinking about community college, is that something where when you were thinking about going to school, do you need to go back to a 4-year or a 2-year graduate degree school? Or do you think about maybe a technical trade or some of the certifications or even a 2-year school to kind of get your feet wet in terms of picking up a new vocation, new set of skills?
I think everybody should get some form of higher education. For some people, that means 4-year college. For some people, that means an apprenticeship. For some people, that means a certificate in whatever it is that they're passionate about. if you're someone who's older and is in the middle of a career, and you know that if you get a 4-year degree in that career and you know that you're happy in it, I think it's probably a safe bet to go to a 4-year school. But if you're someone who, you feel it's important to have a college degree, you might not be 100% certain what you want to pursue, absolutely attending a 2-year or community college or just a lower price state school rather than jumping right into that expensive private 4-year private college is probably a really smart idea. Because as I said in the last segment, over 70% of people change their majors. And that's when it becomes expensive, because that's why you end up taking 5 years to finish instead of 4. So you have a whole other year with a loan debt that ends up getting added on.
Thanks, Betsy. Are there different rules of thumb? So someone who goes back to school at age 45 tries to get a student loan versus someone who is 18, 19, 20 years old. I mean, they've got a longer history. Someone who's more mature has a longer history, an employment history, right? A track record in terms of credit and credit score. What are some of the differences in terms of advice you would give somebody who's more mature and going back and getting a loan?
So, for the quote unquote traditional college student, the general rule of thumb is don't borrow more than the average starting salary for the career that you're considering approaching. I would maybe consider the similar advice to someone who's older, who's attending college, but also to budget the student loan payments before you borrow the debt, and keep your retirement savings in mind. Retirement should come first, no matter what. So if you're looking at, well, if I go and, and get this new 4-year degree, if I stop contributing to retirement or reduce my retirement contributions for 10 years, I'll be able to afford the student loan debt. And that's something I would rethink. And that doesn't mean you don't go to school, but maybe it means you only go to school part-time and pay out of pocket. And sure, it takes a little bit longer, but all of this, going back to school is about long-term financial security. And you don't want to screw up the long-term financial security by taking on student loan debt by going back to school. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think you bring up a really good point, which is I think employers would look upon somebody who's going back to school part-time. This is just me. This is anecdotal. But if they're going back part-time and to do better, I think they would look on that very favorably. So if you decided to change careers or add to something that you're doing and go in a little different direction, I think going part-time, that's a great suggestion. And I think a new or future employer would look very positively on that.
Even better, you might be able to go for free if you go part-time. A lot of employers recognize the value as you just expressed it, and they'll reimburse your tuition up to a certain point. So going part-time, taking a little bit longer, you might be able to get it paid for by your employer. You certainly could reduce the student loan debt. And, an added bonus, as someone who went and pursued a graduate certificate sort of later in life, I was able to get twofers out of it. Some of the projects I had to do for school were actually related to the work that I was doing. So I got a twofer out of it. Yeah,
and you make a really good point. And I think you're right. A lot of employers value that. They want to retain their employees, right? So whether it's a not-for-profit, a government, or for-profit, they want to retain their employees. It costs a lot of money to retrain and bring new people in. Well, Betsy, we're going to leave it there. Really interesting discussion, really timely, of course. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest or someone you think we should talk to? Then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.